evening, everyone. Welcome to the May 4th, may the 4th be with you, 2021 meeting of the Dover-Sherborn Regional School Committee. My name is Maggie Sharon, and I call this meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. This open meeting is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020. Information on how to join remote school committee meetings and meeting agendas are posted on the Dover-Sherborn District website. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. Anything that you broadcast might be captured by the recording. We're going to begin tonight with public comment. Community comments are an opportunity for members of our community to be heard. We respectfully request that you keep your comments brief and that you move the discussion along by adding new information. Please try to avoid repeating points that have already been made. For community comments, please virtually raise your hand or wave in the little box and wait to be called on. When you speak, please begin by stating your name and whether you live in Dover, Sherborn, Boston, or work for the school district. Community comments are an opportunity for the school committee to listen to members of our community, but not a forum for answering questions or engaging in debate. Once the public comment section of our meeting has been concluded, we will move on to other business, and unsolicited comments from our community will no longer be permitted. This is standard operating procedure in school committee meetings across our 3 school districts. Occasionally I put a time limit on it, but since we seem to be a small crowd tonight, I guess I'll just start by asking, is there anyone who'd like to make a community comment? Okay. Very well. In that case, I think we are ready to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is reports. We have reports tonight from the high school, the middle school, and the warrant report. And we've all had a chance to read the reports. Thank you so much to Mr. Smith and Mr. Kellett, and Ms. Hurley's here tonight, and whoever else has had a hand in the reports. They're really thoughtful and detailed. There's clearly a lot going on. I'm wondering if maybe we could hear from Mr. Smith and Mr. Kellett with some sort of highlights and then take questions from the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Sharon, and members of the Regional School Committee and Dr. Keogh. I wanted to start off by saying a congratulations and a job well done to the DS Drama Department for pulling off the spring musical. They were able to have a live performance, which we so desperately needed. As many of you know, they performed Puffs, the off-Broadway musical. I had a chance to go Saturday, saw Miss Miller there. Kids were fantastic. They had a lot of fun. I think they just loved just having the opportunity to be together again, which I think when you break it down was really what was most important. I was also really impressed with the director and was able to give students opportunities to have numerous solos. And I thought the recordings in their homes were fantastic, actually. And it was really nice, and the way it was then brought into the musical itself. A special thanks to the crew for all of their resilience and putting up with bad weather, high winds, pushing things off a couple of days. So really a lot of kudos, really great lesson in resiliency. Really proud of the kids. I had a chance to talk to a lot of them on Monday, just thanking them. And they were pretty energized. They were pretty jacked up and just really felt good that they were able to, get back on stage and sort of get back on that horse and do what they love. So that was a real positive, absolutely. As you know, in my principal reflections, I talked about some silver linings. Interesting enough, I met with my student council today. We once a year meet and we discuss proposals and ideas and things that are on their mind, which is really beneficial to my administration and to our teaching faculty. And one of the things that they talked about, they talked about the benefit of the Wednesdays. And while they understood they had to go away, they just said they just couldn't help but just telling me how beneficial Wednesdays were. And I said, Dr. Keogh and I wholeheartedly agree. And it, unfortunately, it was what it was, but we did recognize the benefit of those Wednesdays for their social, emotional wellness, for being able to sort of catch up, re-energize, but and they understood that, but they just had to make sure that I knew how important those were. But they did talk about the weekly learning plans and how important those were. And I reassured them that next year those would continue, and we would continue using the Google Classroom and using the weekly learning plans for organization. I think they were a great tool for students who have had organizational issues, but I think also for students who are highly organized, they were a great tool in anticipating what's coming up. It helped them plan out their schedule. And what I've said to some teachers who have said, well, you know, John, maybe they won't have this next year in college or the year after. I said, no, but they will have a syllabus. And even more importantly, they will have a skill set developed from these weekly learning plans in the Google Classroom, which they can then take forward to themselves. So that is absolutely a real plus. We also, through this entire pandemic, learned that the content is always important, but most important is actually the relationships and the connections. And I think taking time to just acknowledge one another. You know, sometimes I think in our lives, we move at 100 miles an hour and all the intent is good, yet sometimes we just sit back and learn more about each other. And I do think that some of our teachers really took that to heart and got to know their kids differently, knowing that during a pandemic, it was much harder. With masks, it was much harder. And for those teachers who did, they had a real impact on the kids and made a big difference. It's a busy month with APs, unfortunately with MCAS, but it is what it is. But then we also get to celebrate towards the end of May, a senior celebration at Granite Links, which is fantastic. We have a senior barbecue with games that's being set up for later in the month for the seniors. And then just around the corner will be graduation. We do have about 35 students out on senior project, which is outstanding. And some of them are doing some really neat things. So that general sense of some normalcy returning, I think is really healthy and really, really good. But from it, we have learned, you know, and as an administrative team, we've talked about this at each of our admin meetings, you know, things that we can take from this pandemic, silver linings. So I think it's really, really important that we do reflect on what those are. So I'd be happy to take any further questions, but I'm really proud of the kids. Last week was tough. It was a challenge. They could tell they were tired by the end of the week, and teachers were tired. And it's certainly, you know, it's an adjustment. We have an early release day tomorrow, which I think kids are really looking forward to. We have some departmental PD, which people are really looking forward to because we have some things to catch up on. So we're getting there, and we'll continue to sort of build up that resilience and understanding that it is important, because by doing this now, we really will be in that much better shape come fall. That's, you know, that is the reality. And I'm happy to see kids back. It's great to have them back, and we're working together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your update, Mr. Smith. Do I have any questions from or comments from members of the community, members of the school committee? Kate, and then Judy.
Thanks, Maggie. I just want to echo your comments. John, the play was so much fun. I got to see it Saturday night, and it was threatening rain. And at one point I thought the set was going to blow away, but it didn't. And the kids were just amazing. You know, my daughter, who's now in college, missed out on her senior year show last year. And she and I went together Saturday night, and it was talk about a lesson in resiliency. I mean, it was so impressive. And the videos from home, I agree. And then I was also wondering if you have any information. A few people have asked about graduation.
Yep.
You might still be planning that, but I was wondering if you have any information to share on that.
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, we still have some things that we have to work out and receive final approval from the Board of Health and the Health and Hygiene Subcommittee. But at this point, we are planning an outdoor graduation on the Nora Searle Field, Thursday, June 3rd at 6 p.m. with a rain date of Friday, June 4th at 6 p.m. It looks as though we will be able to have, according to DESE guidelines, 6 family members for each graduate. We are planning on having the graduates sit socially distanced, and then pods of families sit in the Nora Searle. So the stage will be faced in a different direction than it normally is, but that will give us more latitude to spread people out. We are all set in terms of sound system, stage, Everything that we need to do for that, we're in really good shape. We are planning a senior awards, which will be that week of, it'll probably be June 1st or June 2nd with a rain date, of course, because we really cannot hold anything of any substance in the auditorium. So those are the preliminary plans we have at this point. While DESE has ceremonies as brief as possible, we still plan on having student declamation speeches, which I think are really critical. It's a student's day. It's their opportunity, and we'll continue to work with Dr. Keogh and representatives of the town of Dover and Sherborn to see what they would like to do in terms of their speeches. They're generally pretty brief anyway, so I don't think that that's a big deal either way. But we will, move things along, but also make it so that it is a special evening for the graduates and their families.
Great, thank you.
Judy.
Yeah, I want to echo what John said. It was really wonderful to have the opportunity to go and see the high school musical. And I also want to say to John and Dawn and Beth that you could not hear those generators.
No.
That because I had parents calling me, and I was so thrilled that you could not hear. And so thank you. You were right. Okay. I know I talked to Anne about this, and I know that Anne is probably going to ask a similar question. But she'll probably ask it more articulately and in more depth. But John, in your report, you said one thing that struck me. You said we faced numerous challenges. However, I believe this was not a lost year. That really struck me because it made me think that there are those who think this was a lost year. And I think that I'm really proud of the work that we did this year. I think that you educated our kids really well, given the circumstances. And so the question I have is, are we going to do we know academically where the kids are at?
Yeah, so we've had some preliminary discussions with department chairs and, where are you in terms of curriculum? And they feel like from a normal year, and keep in mind this year, using DESE guidance around the power standards. I mean, some of our courses are prescriptive, our APs, but we use the power standards. And by using the power standards, we really sort of focused in and honed in on the most important concepts. And sometimes when we provide instruction, content is important, but it's the transferable skills that are actually the most important. And so I think that with a little bit of a shift of focus with some of those concepts, we probably, by the end of this school year, and considering the fact that we had a longer block each day and we set up different things, we'll probably have completed about 85 to 90% of where we would be. Some teachers actually said they would be just a little bit short. And then other folks said they might be in the 75 to 80 range. So, I'm giving you kind of a rough number, but that's based on talking to department chairs after they surveyed their departments. In some of our departments, I think their mentality is they're pretty heavy on content. And so, yes, some content was probably not delivered, but it's not anything that students who are moving on to college are going to necessarily, be in a hole with, because I actually think that we far accelerate what many schools provide in a year anyways. And I think that instead they focus on those transferable skills that we talk about so much. And it was really that opportunity to use it. So I say it wasn't a lost year because I think sometimes in the media we heard that. We heard pundits saying that. We heard, people criticizing teachers and educators. This was a tough year on teachers. Teachers were vilified, not in Dover and Sherborn, but I think really across the country in a pretty negative way, which was so unfortunate because teachers didn't want nor create this virus, to change our world. That being said, we had some feedback from people in the community that were concerned, and we're concerned about our, competitive edge and missing out on some things, and would it change things? And that's why I just thought it was important to understand that, we did face some challenges, but this was not a lost year. This was not a waste of a year. If you ask me, I think teachers and students probably worked harder this year than they have had to work in past years, just because how you had to handle certain things. So I think that's why I put that in there, that I felt like it was just important to reiterate that despite some of these challenges, people in this community worked very, very hard. Students, parents, teachers, administrators, and we always have at the forefront of our mind providing the very best education. And we also know that, this year caused us to, do some things differently, but sometimes doing it differently doesn't mean that we're at a detriment.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yep, Anne?
Thanks, Maggie. I'd just like to start by saying a huge, huge thank you to John and Scott and Anna, and to actually Anne, DK, and Beth, and Andrew, and Dawn, and all the teachers for getting us back in, everybody in 5 days. I really believe that we were able to do that even ahead of the requirement because of all the groundwork that you all have been doing all year long, and actually starting last summer. I don't think people realize how much work went into getting people in, getting all the students in, making it work. So thank you, and please pass that on from, I'm sure, all of us to those who are not here tonight to hear us saying thank you. Building off of what Judy said, thank you, John, for highlighting the silver linings. I really appreciate that. And I agree with you that it's kind of cool that there are some positives that have come out of this. And I'm wondering, and maybe it's a little too early still for this, but if there are more things that are more specific to content delivery, or more specific to how then courses are going to be structured, because maybe we realize that the content delivery could be done differently or better, that we learned from this year.
Mm-hmm.
If there have been surveys from students or teachers have been surveyed about what they're taking with them. And I'm thinking specifically, like I know, for example, there's been more project-based learning. I know there's been some flipped classrooms. I'm sure there's things that I don't know about, but I'd love to hear more about either if there have been some qualitative ways to discern what works and what we're taking with us, or if we're still in the process of figuring that out.
Yeah, I think we're still in the process, but I mean, I will tell you that, we found some real gains. Once people became accustomed to the flipped classroom, I think that things with that improved. That being said, there's still some struggles, and there's still some things we have to figure out, because it didn't necessarily work for all students. And so that's something that we do need to work through. But to Jim Barudi's credit, he did survey the students and, said what has worked, what hasn't worked with mathematics. And a lot of the kids were pretty much in favor of the flipped classroom, because if you think about it, I think there's a misnomer that you just watch a video and then you have to do homework and then you're kind of on your own. That's not really what the flipped classroom is all about. What it is yes, you are provided some instruction via a video, but it's a video that the teacher of record that you have teaches it. And here's an advantage: you can keep going back and forth. So it is just like you are listening to them. The advantage, because when I've done my teacher observations in mathematics this year, have looked very different, because they typically are workshops where they're working with kids on problems. So instead of a situation where, under the traditional system, a parent might say, well, I like the teacher up front providing instruction on new material so that my kid can learn it. Well, here's the flip side. Your kid goes home and then they have some questions and they might be stuck. Now they have to wait until the next day, or they can reach out to a peer. In the flip model, it's just a different way of looking at it. It's by no means perfect, but it is a different way of looking at instruction so that kids can work with a video, but also then work with their notes, and then come into the class and say, Mr. Barudi, I struggled on number 4. So let's sit down and work on number 4. So there's a lot more one-to-one assistance happening during that class. So I think that that is a learning that we'll take with us. I think we have to do more to educate our community about what it is and what it's not. So I think that that's certainly something we're going to look at. I think that we learned breaking things down into smaller chunks and sort of grouping our instructional activities, meaning, not just 25 minutes of a lecture and then let kids work for 15, but maybe, 10 minutes of a short mini discussion and then 5 minutes to work on it and then another thing. So we're actually incorporating 7 to 8 activities in a class instead of just 2 to 3. So those are definitely a couple things that we're going to be moving towards and looking at, because that's something that we pulled from this new piece. The other is some of the outstanding apps that are being used for formative assessment, which is really for high schools is critical, because traditionally when we all went to school, you had the instruction, maybe you had a review day, you took the assessment, and then you moved on. There wasn't a lot of formative assessment. Some schools that were more progressive did, but your traditional high schools were not. Now there's a lot more formative assessment that's taking place. It gives teachers an actual idea of not only do students understand, but can they apply it, right? It's all about the application. It's not just, I can learn and memorize a formula, great, but can I apply it to 2 different problems and then you throw a little twist in there, can you figure it out? So I do think that that's another piece that we've learned. Our students have reported, the student-teacher connection and the teacher motivating, the teacher inspiring. I think during the pandemic, that became front and center, even more so than in the past, because kids missed it and they realized it was such a critical component to their learning.
Thanks.
Those are just a few.
Beth and then Shobha.
Thank you. I was just going to mention too, in addition to everything that John just offered, we have a K through 12 design team that's working with a project called Project Springboard out of Arizona State University. So we have 8 educators, K through 12, representing each building, and we're coming together every other Wednesday and working with some of our renowned educators, Ted Dintersmith, Tony Wagner, people from Ed Leader 21 and the Portrait of a Graduate, Pasi Salzberg from Finland. And we're designing a process to collect information in an inclusive manner from, and just what you said, from students, from teachers, from parents, and then kind of roll it into our Portrait of a Graduate and come up with Education 2.0. So it's super exciting, and we will certainly keep you informed as it goes on. Anna's on the team as well. And just before I left today, Dr. Keogh stopped in and asked what I was working on. And we need a final Portrait of a Graduate graphic and competencies in order to finish our Project Springboard work. So I was drafting an email to the Innovation Committee and taking a walk down memory lane. So Anne and Maggie and Anna, you'll be hearing from me in the next couple of days so that we can kind of close that chapter and then tie in our silver linings and start to move on and think about next steps.
Thanks. Shobha.
Yeah, so I just wanted to echo what everyone else said. Thank you for your hard work. It's just amazing without a guidebook how administrations and teachers have navigated this pandemic. I think it's amazing. Just to move on in terms of just what's kind of timely that we're hearing about, and that which actually Maggie articulated it really well last night in her debates. But the talk is always about the school rankings and why it fell. What is it? Maybe you can give a sense of what you think the drop in rankings. Is it permanent? What's temporary? And maybe just give us some expectations in the future so the community has a better handle as to not always expecting Dover-Sherborn to be number 1.
Yeah, and I'll just say that the rankings, U.S. News and World Report just came out, and we were ranked very, very high, and we were ranked higher than schools that were ranked higher than us in the Boston Magazine. So, go figure. Now suddenly Acton-Boxborough is number 12. I don't think in 6 months that much changed with them. But so I think that we just have to understand that the rankings are a tool, and they're not something that we ignore, but on the other hand, they are a moving target. and they represent a lot of different things. And from year to year, we have different cohorts of kids. You know, in one year, you might have SAT scores might be a tad stronger than the next year, or then the AP scores might be a little bit higher, or we have a more open process for our APs, therefore more kids get in. That doesn't necessarily mean all those kids are going to get fives. So it's a philosophical question where if we feel like we want equity in education to provide all students that chance, that's going to fluctuate some of our gradings. In terms of where our kids are getting into school, and I know it's a report we'll publish at the end, we're getting kids into highly competitive schools. I talked to a kid today that's going to UVA, talked to a girl that's going to Harvard, talked to a kid who turned down Yale for another school. So I don't think that there's this fluctuation. You know, I don't think a school goes from being a strong school to a poor school in 1 year because of rankings. But I think it's something that we look at and say, okay, hey, how come? You know, what did change with that? And a lot of times it's nothing that's major that got tweaked. Rather, it might be your cohort. It could be, you know, what series of courses were taught and how they were taught. And in some cases, you know, because we are a pretty homogeneous community, we aren't always given positives for that. So sometimes when they provide rankings, they look for your diversity and inclusion, and you get higher rankings for being a more diverse community. Well, until we change that, we can't change that. You know, until more people move in and our populations continue to change and grow, then we can see that. So, you know, it's great if you get this high ranking, but it's also a curse because in the next year, if you don't get number one, people think suddenly you have dropped off the face of the earth. I just don't think that's the case. I think it's slight fluctuations, and you know, I question. So look at Boston Magazine and then look at US News, and you'll see some of the schools in Boston Magazine didn't even make US News top 10 at all. How is that possible? And in many cases too, when you look at charter schools, they sometimes will have, you know, some of the top 2 or 3 schools. And some of those charter schools are very, very good schools. Some of those charter schools are also incredibly selective, and they have a very small portion of students that they accept, despite what their charter says. So when you look at the most recent US News and World Report, I think that Belmont, Lexington, and then it was Dover-Sherborn. Lexington has had a long history of tremendous success. Belmont, not as much. A good, strong school system, but for some reason, you know, they ranked a little bit higher, and I'm not quite sure exactly the specific reason. But then Acton-Boxborough was suddenly number 12, and I would say for my colleagues to Acton-Boxborough, I think they'd still do an outstanding job, and I don't think that they dropped 12 spots because of a different magazine.
Andrew, I know you want to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Maggie, I agree with John or Shobha, your response last night was pretty spot on. And, you know, all I can say as someone who's been around Dover-Sherborn for a long time, whether it was through my students or my own experience or the past 4 years here, I think Dover-Sherborn is better than it's ever been. I think we've tackled big time issues that have been on the agenda for a long time. One of which was this year, you know, going back to what some of the silver linings was resilience, building resilience in our kids, whether they liked it, and I'm sure they didn't, because oftentimes the way to build resilience is to not give kids their way. They probably didn't like it, but they got a lot in terms of lessons in resilience this year. But in terms of the Boston Magazine, my frustration, and I think I speak for pretty much any superintendent in Massachusetts, is that these are tools, frankly, for sales. Well, let's face it, these magazines are making money off of sales. And when the Best of Boston comes out, that's a big time for Boston Magazine. But if you look at their metrics for how they measure these schools, it's completely unfair. Now, having been in Easton before Dover-Sherborn and Wellesley before that, I can tell you, I've been like a dog chasing my tail, trying to figure out what is what is it they're going to ask for this time? And in this particular past ranking, because naturally we do care. I mean, we care. We want to know what's going on, and so we looked. And one of the categories that we were measured by for the first time. This was never used before by Boston Magazine. I've been watching them every year because I've been in places where we were watching the rankings, of course, perhaps too much. And one of the things that they added this year was the proficiency ratings of the teachers. Now, the reason why this is relevant is because we actually, the year before, correct me if I'm wrong, Beth, spent a lot of time talking with our administrators about not just automatically saying that people are the top scale, like that there's nowhere to improve. They're just perfect, advanced, and there's no need for improvement. Let's give honest assessments and ask people to strive to improve, because we know that anyone can improve. And so there were more rankings that year or ratings, I should say, of teachers where we said, excellent, but there's still room for improvement. And don't you know, that's the year that Boston Magazine decides to count those, weight those. So, I mean, it's like the pandemic. It's like what we just went through this year. You never know what's coming next. So next year they could change the metric completely and say, you know, like, let's think that through. What they were basically saying is that if all your teachers were rated high, then you're a better school system. Well, what if you're just inflating grades? So that's really, it's just such an unfair and inefficient model. And what you end up figuring out after a while, if you're that dog chasing the tail, is that there's so many ways to beat this. I was in Hopkinton as an assistant principal when we figured out, oh, gee, if you have more kids taking AP, whether or not they do well is only one part of it. But if more kids take AP, sign up for AP, you will get a higher rating. So suddenly, in the past 5 to 10 years, Hopkinton has been off the charts in these national rankings because so many kids are considered college ready because they take AP. But we have always traditionally had a fairly high bar to get into AP. We've since grown and I think learned and said, you know what, it's not fair for, and I think you might have said this last night, Maggie, it's not fair to tell a kid, well, you're not capable of achieving at high levels, therefore you shouldn't try this course. So we are putting the best interest of the kids before any rankings. And we know that realtors don't necessarily agree with that model, of course, because those rankings sell. But I'll tell you, this is a great school system, and it is in very good shape. And it's a credit to everyone sitting here in this space, including Jane and the folks from the Finance Committee and the Warrant Committee who support us. We are an excellent system. We do have fluctuations. Are we perfect? I don't think so. And that's why, we've had a strategic plan that was as aggressive as it was, and I'm sure you guys will continue that work. So that's my rant.
That's all right. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate the support and the enthusiastic explanation. I agree with you. It's a challenging hill that keeps moving around, and if all you do is worry about climbing it, you're going to waste a lot of good opportunities to give kids great education. I do have one question on that topic. It's just, I got 3 emails about this today, and I don't know what it's related to, what's out there in the world, but just we're not getting rid of our AP programs here at the high school. Can someone just clarify that for the public?
No. So I think I told folks early on that we had some discussions at our academic standards committee over the last couple of years about weighted versus unweighted GPA. And many high-performing schools that perform incredibly well on Boston Magazine rankings, have actually eliminated their weighted GPA because they recalculate at the collegiate level anyways. And there's been a stigma where if under the weighted GPA, you get a higher quality point average for your courses. Now, granted, you may have a more rigorous transcript, and so there's an argument for that. There's arguments on both sides of this particular thing. I did have a conversation with a parent about a week ago, and I was concerned because this parent said, well, I know a survey went out. Well, a survey was sent out by a sophomore student. And so that should have never happened. I had a conversation with that student because that's really not an effective use of our email system, because this student thought that that's what was going to happen and was misinformed. So our APs and our honors courses and our college prep courses are here to stay, will remain well beyond my time. And if anything, we're looking to increase those offerings at all of those different levels. The one thing we may discuss, and it's probably a longer discussion, is our weighted GPA benefiting all of our students appropriately from an equity standpoint? That's really where the question lies. And I think our equity audit hopefully may help us, dig some of that information up. Because on the one hand, I do sympathize and empathize with kids that say, well, it also is a motivation for me to perform better, to get a higher GPA. But what parents in the community need to know is that college and that university, they are recalculating your GPA regardless. They have to. There are thousands upon thousands of high schools across this country, and we have it on a 5.0 scale. I know a school down the road has it on a 7.0 scale. The only way a college can make sense of it is if they have an equal playing field where they can figure it out. And that's, and then you take like the UMass system, the state colleges, they have a system by which they calculate everything too. So absolutely. And I've even said this in an email blast to parents. Our APs and our honors courses aren't going anywhere. We are not getting rid of those courses. We find merit in that. Sometimes we actually combine those CP and honors courses. We run a heterogeneous course, which is fantastic in many different ways. It's only a discussion that we're looking at, does the weighted GPA benefit our student population at this point in time? That's it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate clarification on that. I think we added AP computer science this year. Am I correct?
Correct.
I'm not sure if we added any other APs. I know sometimes we have kids who take AP classes through virtual high school or through different ways.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we're talking about potentially offering comparative politics in the AP level in a couple of years.
That's huge.
Yep.
We also changed the weighting, John, correct, on the engineering, because kids weren't taking it.
That's
because
correct.
It wouldn't help their GPA. So,
right.
We're constantly looking at this stuff. We want to do what's best for our kids. And I agree with John, for all of our kids.
Yeah. And I'm not interested in hampering any of our competitive nature of our kids for the most competitive colleges and universities across the country either. So that's why this is not a simple, okay, we're just changing this. We have to really dive into it to ensure whatever decision we make and then bring forward to the regional school committee for your consideration has to take into consideration all students in all situations. There's a couple schools that actually use both a weighted and an unweighted as a means to work around that. But I will tell you that some very high performing schools that we compare ourselves to have done away with the weighted GPA. They just felt like it was presenting a false storyline. It's the rigor of the transcript that the college admissions offices will look at. The 4.62, 4.45 means nothing to them. Instead, what means something to them is looking at that transcript to see how many APs, how many honors, how many Harvard extensions, how many Johns Hopkins. That's what they're looking at when it deals with the most competitive universities and colleges across the country and the world, for that matter.
Thank you. I think it's just really important that's a rumor that seems to be circulating around town, and I just want to make sure it's crystal clear. Our rigorous academic program is not under assault. There is nobody taking a look at these courses. Whatever is going on in the state of Virginia around taking away math classes is not happening at Dover-Sherborn High School. And I actually want to commend you regarding the math department in particular, because I know just because I have a child taking these classes right now, not only is there honors pre-calculus, which can go into AP BC calculus or AP AB calculus or honors calculus or AP statistics, or you could also take AP statistics, or I understand the one who lives in my house is taking AP calculus, plus he's also taking this new financial literacy course that you're offering and honors engineering. So what I think is wonderful about your programs is that there's pathways. There's many different pathways, and lots of them can end up at the most high levels that any person could want to learn math in high school. So I think it's really important that that's a rumor that we sort of put to rest.
Yep. Sounds like I need to reiterate that to the community. I'm happy to do so.
Huge thank you. And more than that, huge thank you for all the work that has gone into all of these classes and designing courses and academic council and all the stuff that's behind the scenes, and go comparative politics. That's exciting. Scott, we haven't even started with you. Scott and Anna, we have a lot of things going on at the middle school as well. I really enjoyed reading your update. Are there any sort of highlights that you want to share with us?
Scott, you're muted.
I'm going to jump on a few silver linings that came out of the John's sharing out. One is the middle school has no GPA. The second is we don't have AP courses. That is, for that we are most grateful. Having said that, I do think that some of the questions that were asked about our kids, where do our kids stand? I think our through the work Beth and the learning committee did last summer, I think our kids are really in a good place. Is it perfect? Is it what we've had in the past? Maybe not, but I think it's very close. I think people have adapted. There's a lot of things that through the work that will come out of the committee she spoke of earlier. There's a lot of good things, and one of those things, it might sound really stupid, because I guess I'm a kid at heart, is our middle school kids eating outside when it's good weather. It's so nice to see them go out and be able to interact. Unfortunately, we don't have the extended time for break where they can go out and run around and play tag, whatever. But that's been a real huge plus for us, and I hope that's not something that's lost as we move forward. Let's see. So, well, we have a lot of really cool stuff that has happened. And one of which is we met with two of our students and their parents as they were selected as our scholar leaders for this year. And those two students would be Garrett Wilson and Yasmin Nee. The scholar leaders, just some of the criteria includes teamwork, dependability, academic achievement, respect for diversity, service to others, and there's a list of about 20 different things. And given they're in a class of 160, I would say there's probably between 30 and 40 students who would be worthy of the award, but these two stood out to their teachers, and congratulations to them. I think you may have heard this earlier, but our math counts team did an outstanding job this year. In particular, Michael Yang was in the local competition. He came on first out of 154 students. And then when he went on to the next level of competition, he ended up 15th out of 36, and Simon Chen ended up 21 out of 36. So that is just, it's incredible. Those are some of the students that the high school will be getting. In addition, the math club earned gold status through Math Counts, another fantastic feat. I'm gonna let Anna share some other news that we got, and I think you'll understand why.
I'm super excited to share with you guys that we had a group of students participate in the science fair this year, and they had phenomenal success. And I want to share some of those details in a second, but I think kind of going back to John's presentation, one of the best shifts that has happened in this pandemic has been the shift from compliance from students to their engagement. And I think the fact that all of these children took their own time, and our teacher who's new, Wendy Rush, volunteered her own time, even over February vacation, to help students do these science fair projects, just speaks to the level of engagement and passion. And we're finally able in these 90-minute periods to let kids do things like project-based learning. So I'm just really excited. One, I love science, but two, I'm just so thrilled to see some of the dreams that we had in that academic innovation committee kind of come to fruition. So I'm really excited to share. Thank you to Miss Wendy Rush, our 8th grade science teacher, who supported 6 different teams. For the first time ever, we had 3 8th grade students, Katie Bingham, Kayla McKinley, and Lily Hatfield, earn the grand prize. So in the history of DS, we've never had a student win the grand prize at science fair, which is super cool. And then we also, all of the kids placed. So then we also had 2 more teams get a first place, and second place and third place. So they just did amazing work. And we put it in the notes so you can read everybody's name, and I'm happy if you want, but I want to help you keep your meeting moving along. But some of those authentic passion projects just seem to bubble up through the kids throughout this whole year. And I think it's just an unexpected win. I mean, it's just such a wonderful thing. So we have a student, Ty June. He's a 7th grader, and he has a passion for multimedia presentations and making videos. He wants to be a filmmaker, and he entered an environmental video that he made called Bottle to some Redford Center Stories Challenge, and he came in 2nd place, and it was fantastic. And then they loved him so much that they invited him to be a panelist this past Friday, speaking about filmmaking and his passion. And then also 2 other students were able to get their poetry printed in teen ink. So I just think this really speaks to our dream for our students in our schools, that kids are gonna have authentic interest and passion for learning and take ownership of their own learning. So this is just fantastic news. And so we're really happy to share it with you. One other smash hit I wanted to share in terms of our silver linings, and I know many of you have lived through our parent-teacher conferences and all of its iterations over the years, and I do think that Zoom parent-teacher conferences, when we have teachers with a caseload of 100 kids, was the way to go. So that was an unexpected win. And, we could sit here all night and talk about a lot of the wins and great things that have come out of this year. But I do feel excited for, the authenticity of the learning, and also just the camaraderie of teachers. I mean, teachers really banded together, whether it was getting up at 4 a.m. to help each other get vaccination shots, or, friends helping other friends learn how to do Aspen and enter grades, or learn apps, or learn Google Classroom. I have to say, teachers, when the rubber hits the road, really dig in and help each other. And I can't tell you how many countless folks have supported each other off hours to figure things out together. And that, as a school leader, has been so wonderful to watch. It's like when your kids at home finally get along when you're not looking, and it's like, oh, we're doing something right. So it has been a true joy to kind of muddle through this crazy year and all these unexpected wins. Thank you.
The other, the piece that is huge to me is, all of you have spoken about, thank you to all of us for what we've done, but you folks have also given us the license to go about our business, and they had the confidence in us, and that is greatly appreciated. The best thing we got, the greatest silver lining to me, is when the kids all came back and they were in the building together. Because you had kids who, 15, 16 months ago would be, you know, school stinks. I hate this. They're now coming in, you know, Anna mentioned Ty June. He came back and every morning he walks by us and he is, you can see with the bounce in his step, the smile on his face, the way he says hello, he's just thrilled to be coming in every day. So thank you for having confidence and giving us, you know, leeway to try things and adjust things, and it's greatly appreciated.
You're welcome. Questions for middle school updates? Comments?
No GPA questions, John.
Mike. Okay, Kate.
I just want to say quickly that, you know, I think all the exciting things you talked about at the beginning, the poetry and the filmmaking and the science fair and the math, you know, I think that really speaks to our teachers' dedication to figuring out what really excites the kids and going that extra mile to find out about the poetry contest, to volunteer to help with the science teams and that kind of thing. So that is greatly appreciated. I know for me as a parent and for my middle schooler as well. So thank you.
All right. I know in my world, we often say middle school doesn't count, but it really matters. And I think that you guys have done an amazing job of maximizing all the days and the time that you've had to create opportunities for kids that really matter. And so I too am grateful that you don't have GPAs to worry about, and that if a kid has a rough semester in 7th grade or 8th grade, it's okay. They are going to recover and be just fine. But thank you for everything. I was able to read the school improvement plan. That's looking fantastic. It's really forward focused, and it's just really exciting news coming from both the high school and the middle school. And it's Teacher Appreciation Week. So with great appreciation to all of the educators who made all that amazing stuff happen and who will help those kids who might be struggling to get back on their, back on the bike, to do so in a way with grace and care. And I know you'll do that. So thank you. All right. The warrant report is there. Are there any questions about the warrants? Fantastic. Monthly financial reports. Dawn, you've been so patient waiting for us, hearing about all the wonderful things going on in school.
So exciting. So hopefully my news will continue the excellent reports. So in your packet, you have your financials as of April 30th, and then your special revenue and revolving funds as of March 31st. As we've been doing we're sort of doing a roll forward report, and whatever in bold is the new information. So in the revenue section, the new information that we have for you since the last time we met in March was that we finally did receive our first Chapter 71 transportation payment. The good news there is that it came in at a 90% reimbursement rate. The cherry sheet had projected about a 76% reimbursement rate, which is why on your financial statements prior to this, we were showing that we were going to have a negative revenue variance in that line item. However, with the 90% reimbursement rate, we actually are in line with our budget for fiscal year 21. What that means then is that the little safety net of $85,000 that we put aside in your regional transportation fund last year, we don't need. So all of that is going to be a positive variance in your expenditure, because we take our transportation expense that's budgeted in our general fund, and $85,000 of that's going to go to wipe out the regional transportation fund, because you can't roll that. That has to be used in the following year. So that impact now has been reflected in your expenditure statement, which is why you see an increase in the variance in your transportation. On the other couple little revenue things, at this point in time, we probably are not going to be collecting any additional high school or middle school activity fees. So we have let that balance go. So you see a little bit of a negative impact there. And then as we'd already mentioned before, The negative impact on your assessments, just remember, is the excess of 5% in our E&D that was given back to the towns. So I don't think that they're not paying, that's just the give back.
Okay.
On the expenditure side, salaries, we've talked about this in previous months, but we are anticipating about a $400,000 positive variance in salaries for various reasons. One is staffing changes. You'll see in your teacher classroom that there's a positive variance of 130,000 there. That's not necessarily savings. That's just it ended up being who sat in what seat. Because based on COVID, and then as you know, Anna was in the interim assistant principal. Those positions were filled with teachers on their lower level of the pay scale. So therefore, that savings fell out to us for this fiscal year. In addition, your custodial, we didn't have any of our summer help this summer. We haven't had as much overtime. And then remember, we don't have a director of facility. So there is quite a bit of savings from that, even though we've got the consultant 2 days a week, it's not costing us as much as that position. And another big issue too, or another big contributor to the positive variance of substitutes. Obviously, with our staff only being in 2 days for the majority of the year, we didn't have circumstances where we had to utilize a lot of substitutes. So that's almost an $80,000 savings right there. So it all adds up. But it's all actually positive things. And then we didn't have to really add any additional staff at the region for COVID related operations. So that's a positive and something we didn't see at the elementaries where we did have to add staff. So we were fortunate in that respect. On the expenditure side, couple highlights, you'll now see that your transportation service, positive variance of 170,000. We do have some more sports. We haven't encumbered the spring sports yet, but a lot of that you're seeing is a little bit of savings from not having the full school year for our transportation, in addition to the regional transportation reclass of 85,000. Another thing I want to highlight, if we look at your employer insurance for active and retirees, so we definitely are having a little bit of a positive variance in our active employees, but part of that and how it's going to play into your retiree contribution to OPEB is that we had 2 mid-year retirements, which then their expense for their insurance went against our retirement line item versus our active. So I'm actually taking the savings from that, and we're going to add that to the savings that we have from the cost share savings for employees. So reflected in your statement is a contribution to your OPEB trust fund of 200,000. So the 100,000 that we carried over from last year, plus we have 100,000 that we can contribute this year. So that's reflected in your financials. The other key expense item I wanted to highlight, and it also plays into the revolving fund. So we talked about food service and sort of the lower participation, not having full people in. We were hoping that we were going to be able to break even. What we have ended up doing by looking at their numbers closer is that they do fund their Norfolk County assessment retirement piece. In years in the past, when they were not operating at a positive variance, that's the one sort of expense item that we would bring back to the general fund to help their fund balance. So we did bring in their Norfolk County assessment amount of about $50,000. We reclassed it over to the general fund. So you will see in your special revenue statement right now that puts them at a negative fund balance of about $12,000. We know that we're going to have much better operations in April, May, and June. So we do anticipate that number going back into the black. So that was the one step I think that we needed to take, because at the end of the year, you can't have a revolving fund with a negative balance. It has to be moved over to your general fund. So in anticipation of potentially not getting into the black, we went ahead and made that financial entry. And it's it's actually in historically what we've done with the food service.
All right. Questions for Dawn? Anne?
Thanks, Dawn. I know you explained this, but I need a little bit more detail. So the retirement funds that are in the red, you mentioned how we're funding with OPEB, but are we funding those line items also from what was left over from the active employee?
Yeah, so if you look at your active employee, we have a positive balance of about $76,000 in that line item.
Right.
Part of that variance, that positive variance, is because a couple of employees that started the year as active employees retired during the year.
Mm-hmm.
So when they retire, their insurance expense goes against the retiree line item. Had they not retired, we would have had more of a positive savings in the retirement line item. And I did want to shortchange ourselves because the OPEB funding is derived completely by the savings that we're having in that line item from the change in cost share. So we were actually eating into some of the cost share money that we should have had by having those two employees. They weren't budgeted to be retirees, but they retired during the school year.
Okay.
So I took the cost of their health insurance and acted like they weren't in the retirees to make up for it.
Okay.
So I could have you can't make a reclass entry per se, but I don't really like to touch my budget numbers. I just rather explain the variances.
No, that makes sense. I just wasn't quite following.
Yeah,
So
I did. Yeah, because otherwise we'd have shortchanged ourselves in what we could have contributed to the OPEB.
Shobha.
So I guess wanted to understand, it looks like we had all these monies in from the American Rescue Plan, the ESSR grant, which I assume is $149,000, not $149. And it says here that the CARES reopening grant must be spent by June 30th, 2021. Are we able to spend it by that time, or is that?
Yes, no, we're on track to spend all of our CARES funds that need to be spent by June 30th. In fact, they're all pretty much. We did final budget revisions, amendments with DESE on those funds, and so they're all set and basically covered.
Okay, and then and how hard is it to spend the rest of these funds going through the years? So I said the grant timeline extends to the fall of FY24.
Right.
So if I add up these numbers, that 400K in savings and 370K in COVID.
Well, no, the savings. So the savings that we have on the operating side, actually. So I'll have to give you a whole financial training
we'll
class,
do that.
but we don't keep that money.
Okay.
That money, we're allowed to keep 5% of our operating budget in sort of free, I'll call it free cash, because if you watch town meetings, it's equivalent to their free cash. It's called our excess and deficiency. So we're able to keep that on hand. Anything savings that we generate beyond that gets returned to the member towns.
Okay.
So it does look like this year we are going to have a surplus greater than we're going to be able to hold on to, and we will be returning some funds after our balance is certified. We'll use them to offset next year's assessments for Dover and Sherborn.
Okay, and maybe give a sense of these funds from the American Rescue Plan and ESSR grants. Is it only specific use, or could you use it for?
They're pretty broad, but it's really we're looking at it more, and I've been working with the administration team and Beth, and Kate McCarthy, looking at sort of services for catch up. So we look like we're going to have some healthy summer services. To make sure for learning losses that students are up and ready to roll in the fall. Social emotional
for high school and middle school?
Yeah, for high school and middle school. Social emotional learning. So any additional services that we may need next year, we can use money for that. We have a new data tool that they're looking at using. So we already have allocated some of our ESSER money for that for fiscal year 22. So it's really additional services that we will need. And if there's any continued COVID protocols that we need to cover, PPE or whatever else we need, that's also covered. They're keeping it pretty broad of what you can use. It's not for just normal operations. It's got to be for something that's related to what we're just coming out of.
Okay. And I assume that we've got the maximum grant that we're capable of getting.
Yeah, it's all derived based on your student population, your wealth of your community. It's a complicated figure, but yes.
So I assume this also at some point will be returned, because we're using this money, there'll be more savings for the town.
No, not necessarily, no? Because it's not supposed to take the place of monies you've already had budgeted. So in our budget discussions, we highlighted the fact that we built our budgets for fiscal year 22 based on normal operations. So any additional services, PPE, cleaning, staff that we need because of it's related from the pandemic, that's what we use this money for. So you're not supposed to use this money to supplant what you've already normally budgeted for. This is supposed to be supplement. So we add.
Okay. So and
it goes the ARP goes out until fiscal year 24.
Okay.
So when you look at it over 22, 23, you've almost got 3 years to use it.
It might be helpful just in terms of thinking about time and so forth. If we do sort of a budget workshop,
sure.
Is that all right? If we do that sort of thing, okay.
And I guess had one last question. Then Don, I'll just probably talk to you separately. But would we ever think of using Zoom for substitutes going forward instead of substitute teachers? I mean, I know we saved a lot of money by not having to pay the substitute salary, but can we use Zoom as a tool where if a teacher says, I don't have childcare today, I'll Zoom into my classroom.
I think, like, just speaking with my teacher hat on,
it's too much.
The problem is you need an adult. So in general, I mean, I'm not going to speak for the school administration that could never happen ever, but I think one of the problems is you still need like a live body. And so I think it's not like our first choice per se. I don't know if other folks want to chime in.
Yeah, and we want to spend we'd rather have a body, a live teacher there. So I don't think that we wouldn't use that as a cost savings. We'd do that if that was the best thing for the students and the teacher, but not from a cost savings perspective.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Dawn. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much. Other questions about the monthly financial reports? None from me, except thank you again, because I start making questions and then I read the reports and then they get answered. And it's just such an enjoyable activity. Thank you. All right. Memorandum of agreement regarding health insurance. So I'll let Dawn talk us through the details of this. But for those of you who've been around for, the last 4 years, you will remember that 4 years ago, we did a huge, look as part of the employee benefits subcommittee. We hired a consultant. We looked at the entire insurance marketplace, did an RFP for like, what is the best insurance that we can offer that will be really economical for our community and also good insurance for our employees, and ultimately decided to stay with West Suburban. They had just enacted the high deductible plan, which provides cost savings for the employer and also an option for a health savings account for the employee. So we did that. And in order to get folks interested in that, we did a 1 year, incentive program. That's moved a substantial number of folks into that. And this memorandum of agreement is basically continuing on the matching for the high deductible plans and other things that Dawn will talk about into the next few years. So Dawn, what specifics do we need to know before we vote?
So I will say this was, and Maggie joined us, it was the easiest negotiation meeting ever held. It was like 12 minutes. So basically we just took what was still living in the existing memorandum agreement that's expiring on June 30th and brought it forward to a new document. And so as Maggie said, we are going to continue from an employer standpoint to contribute $2,000 to any employee who does the family high deductible health plan coverage and $1,000 for the individual. The other piece that's continuing is the option to opt out. And so there's one little change with that, in discussions with the town of Dover, because we did this in conjunction with the town of Dover because they're also still in West Suburban Health Group and had the exact same memorandum agreement with us last time. It was the desire on their part, and then it was fine with us to move the date for the opt-out to anyone who has been on our health insurance for 2 years prior to July 1st, 2021, where the previous agreement was July 1st, 2018. So it just expands that potential for people to use the opt-out if they're a new employee with us and say over the last 3 years, but have been on our insurance for at least the last 2 years. And so they just felt like that was important to continue offering that, because if someone does take the opt-out, there is significant savings to the town or the district from that provision. So those are the two things that are staying still living for the next 3 years. And so we have agreement from all the associations that they are fine with this, and the same agreement is being presented and approved with the Dover Board of Selectmen on Thursday evening. So we'll be in concert with both the Dover employees and the Dover-Sherborn regional employees. So we're bringing it forward to you guys tonight for approval.
So I want to just echo what Dawn says. This is one of the most delightful negotiations that I've ever been able to participate in. And I think the bottom line is why that is. It's not because anybody's winning or losing. This agreement really provides a win-win for both the employer and the employee in terms of providing insurance flexibility, in terms of, rewarding people who don't use our insurance. And I do think, though, that just in terms of for Jane and Sarah, who are here tonight, just kind of looking ahead into the next year, we did get word from West Suburban that they're going to be dropping, not for this year, but for the following year, their participation in the Fallon plans, which is the most sort of economical tier of West Suburban's offerings. Hopefully they'll come up with something else that's economical for folks who want a much more economical plan, but just to kind of be looking. We've had really good luck with pretty low premium increases this year. And that's been really favorable to our budget, but just always looking ahead and not wanting to be caught unawares. Just so folks.
Right. So I was going to jump into that, but West Suburban, we've already started. We're going to have pretty regular board meetings from now over the next year, looking at, they're probably going to be doing similar things to what we did when we were reevaluating our health plan, and they may do an RFP, look out, see what's out there. There's a lot of, if you remember this discussion, there's just a lot of pieces to this moving puzzle, and one of them is the GIC. And so the GIC will be going out for their big plan redesign, rebidding process in the next, not this year, but the following year. So there's a lot of things happening that could change the landscape a little bit. But I will say that we're fortunate that the towns that do participate in West Suburban are all financially sound, well organized, aggressive. Let's get the best thing we can do. So we're working with a great team of people as we move forward with this. But it could be that we're back visiting something like this memorandum of agreement for fiscal year 23 if there is going to be significant changes in what we do. There's some feelings that if you granted, Fallon is the low-cost plan right now, and in some towns it is like the predominant plan. We're pretty lucky here in that we're pretty evenly split between the 4 plans that are offered. Keep in mind, though, that Tufts and Harvard Pilgrim have also merged. Their merger will not be completely into play for us until I think it's fiscal year 24. So we still have those 2 plans operating as 2 plans, but pretty soon if we didn't do anything, we would be down to 2 plans. Not that that's a bad thing, but it just makes you sit back and think about what's happening. So a lot coming down the pike in this arena, but I think that we're in good shape to hopefully pivot and turn out, find even a better landing place than we are now. But we have definitely had huge success with a high deductible plan. As I say in my memo, we're still at like 48% participation. And again, it's a cost savings not only for us, but also for the employee, and then the opportunity for this great savings vehicle. So they were very concerned that we might not continue the contribution. So I do think that's why the meeting went so well, because they were thrilled to know that that was going to be a continued, provision that we would take care of.
All right, so this is an action required item. So I'd like to entertain a motion that the Regional School Committee approve the memorandum of agreement as stated in your packet regarding health insurance.
Ann Hovey, so moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Kate Potter, second.
Thank you. So motion made by Ann Hovey, seconded by Kate Potter. If everyone could take yourselves off mute. Do I have any discussion? Lynn? You need to unmute.
I had a question, and it was about the actual agreement, that it has this odd provision in it that sort of contemplates if this should WSHG cease to be a viable entity during the term of the agreement. That's not typical contract language, but maybe it is for this context. But is there something anticipated that it's possible they could cease being a viable entity?
Tell me where that is.
It is in the first paragraph, paragraph 1, the term. It's the second sentence.
Oh yeah, no, well, I think that's just, that was left in there. Well, I will say, at one point in time, when this was originally crafted, and we worked with employment attorney from Dover who worked with us this go around. So I think this was his recommendation to keep the TURN agreement. West Suburban was actually looking like it could go under.
Oh.
And so that is, I think, why that was there. And if towns start pulling out, so if towns do leave, it becomes a little more dicey too. So I think that's it protects us, because who knows what's going to happen with all these changes that are happening in West Suburban. Some of the larger towns could pull out. Yeah. And with that, it does make the viability of the organization a little less stable. So that's because of the nature where we were a couple of years ago. I think that's why that language is still there.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Any other discussion? Okay, if you could take yourself off mute. Ann Hovey?
Ann Hovey, yes.
Kate Potter?
Kate Potter, yes.
Shobha Fry?
Shobha Fry, yes.
Judy Miller?
Judy Miller, yes.
Lynn Collins?
Lynn Collins, yes.
And Maggie Sharon, yes. Motion passes.
Thank you all.
Okay. Next item on the agenda are proposed changes to the middle school and high school handbooks. This is a first read, so we will not be voting to approve these handbooks tonight, but they've been included in your packet with the changes that are being proposed highlighted. I don't know if Mr. Smith or Mr. Kellett wants to talk about anything or just entertain questions.
I'll certainly just give a real quick overview. The first proposed change is similar to Scott, in which we just want to insert the regional school system in the district's equity statement to include that. Our other two pieces, one is a little clarification around plagiarism and cheating, and it's not really around the definition, but rather it's some of the offenses and the discipline. Ann Keegan in her Java-like groups, we've done a lot of research on this because we want these to be teachable moments, and we don't want these to be situations where kids are buried because of a mistake they made. We want them to truly understand what plagiarism and cheating is. but we also don't want to have one mistake, end up ruining an entire grade or forcing them out. So we changed the offenses to make them, we think, a little bit more lenient, but more importantly, a little bit more of a teachable opportunity. The first one is really just with the teacher. Parents are notified in each of the cases, so the parents are in the loop. And instead of just an automatic 0, I think some of our teachers over the years have said, look, I do want to have this conversation to make sure they know, because in past years or a number of years ago, plagiarism and cheating was in some ways a little bit easier to determine. Today, it's harder for kids because there's so many multiple media sources where you can get things. It's hard to figure out sometimes where these things come from. So we've done a lot of education in our English department around it. We have also purchased some of our programs, like Google Docs allows you to track progress of the author. Turnitin allows us to see if things are taking place. So we just felt as though changing the verbiage around so that it's more of a teachable moment rather than a draconian, you get a 0, you're thrown out of the course, because for kids, that's very hard to overcome. If we see repeated offenses, obviously we have concerns, and it does progressively get more challenging for the student. But that was the reason for that change. And then some of our other proposed verbiage, it's kind of a silver lining or a learning from the pandemic, and that's to give all of our students the opportunity to sleep in, but then to also be dismissed by a parent or guardian if they have a DR at the end of the day. And in particular, with our junior lunch for next year, we're trying to anticipate we probably will still have some density restrictions come fall. So we are proposing that the regional school committee consider our opportunity to have juniors sign out for the lunch block. They can only do that next year if they have a DR prior to or after the lunch. So it's a little different from this year because our lunch block is longer. Next year, we'd really just tie in with the DR before or the DR after.
Okay. Thanks. Can I assume that all of what you're sharing means that next year at the high school, you're going back to the schedule that we had all talked about before the pandemic hit, with not with the 4 blocks a day? We're going back to the one with the flex block at the end of the day.
Correct, with the flex block, correct.
All right. I'm going to have Scott, do you want to do your changes? Then we'll just take questions all together. Does that work for people? Okay.
I will defer to Anna.
Okay. Anna.
So we have 2 changes, as John mentioned. We added the equity statement to the front of the handbook because we want that to be out front as a core belief and a big predictor of where we're going next year. And then the second change that we had in our Q&A, our frequently asked questions, we folded in some of the content about the one-to-one Chromebook initiative and some of the protocols around the school devices. They came from our family guides and they were really helpful. So we just added that to the section of the what ifs. The what if I forget my lunch money? What if I forget my charger? Super helpful stuff that we just had from the family guides that we thought needed a home now in the handbook. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. I love the what ifs. I really, really enjoyed them. I love the tone of it. And speaking of a person who lives in middle school, super helpful format of a lot of things. What questions do folks have for this first read? Comments, concerns? Yep, Anne?
First, I want to say thank you. I really love that you're putting in the statement, the equity and social justice statement at the beginning. Thank you. And I'd love to sort of say that sometimes when things don't get changed in the handbook, we don't review them every year. I would like to propose that we come back and look at this every year just to kind of reset and remind ourselves, if that's possible. Thank you for that. And also really quickly, John, with the offenses for discipline, for plagiarism, or for anything else, is there room for severity? Like if a student seems to have taken a few lines from another document or looks like they put pieces together from several documents versus they bought a paper online and you find the existing paper online. So is there sort of flexibility in that? Or is it pretty standard, like the first time? It doesn't really matter the degree of the offense?
Yeah, we definitely look at the degree of it when we deal with it. So, right, if they, stole somebody else's paper or, right, that's a much bigger deal than, this word was taken from a quote and not used. So yes, absolutely. For Ann and I, the big thing was that first one, the teacher and the student meeting, and then the teacher to explain this to the student why it is that what you did was not, because what we don't want to have happen are these mistakes to take place when they go off to college and university, because sometimes they may not be as, forgiving for that. And then absolutely, Ann, in terms of the severity of it is absolutely looked at. And that's where we throw in things like possible removal, from NHS, because it really does depend upon the severity. Even with the first offense, there'll be an academic consequence determined by the teacher. There'll be an academic consequence determined by the teacher. That speaks to the severity piece.
Thank you. And I'd say I love that you're thinking about it from a teachable moment perspective. So thank you for that.
Lynn, do you have your hand up for this one? Or is it just up from before?
It's just up, but I was wondering, I never remember to take it down. Will there be some sort of rubric in place that will ensure sort of consistency across teachers as far as how they decide to handle a particular plagiarism incident?
Well, they notify us. So we are always involved with it in terms of a discussion. So we absolutely discuss it, as does the department chair with that teacher. So not necessarily a rubric per se, but there is sort of a clearinghouse of a number of different people that discuss the situation. And, that you can see in here, it has been confirmed, right? So confirming means that, we've done sort of an investigation of it and kind of tried to get to the bottom of what it was, or, wow, these two homeworks look alike. Well, in our investigation, we found out that some kid took it from another kid without the other kid's knowledge. Well, that kid whose paper was taken, that's not their fault. I mean, they didn't do anything. But if they were complicit in it and they were sharing this information, that's different. So, we do spend, we fortunately don't have a lot of these, but when we do have them, there is a good deal of conversation that happens with the teacher, the department chair, and a member of administration as to what's the proper outcome of this.
All right, thanks.
All right.
And I know what you mean, Lynn, because it does need to have consistency around that, because you can't have a teacher who says, well, back in my day, this is what it was. And then you have another teacher saying, look, kids are going to make mistakes. You've got to have the consistency. And I think that that's where the administration comes into place, where before anything is handed out, we are involved with it to say, okay, what did you find out? And what do we think is fair and reasonable? But more importantly, how do we teach this opportunity so that when the student moves ahead? Because there are a couple cases where students said, oh my goodness, I honestly, I thought I quoted it the right way, or I thought and then suddenly it's maybe just more of a mistake, an honest mistake, than it is actual cheating or plagiarism. And that's why we do need to have a say in that.
All right. Thanks. Any other comments or questions? So this is a first, Kate, sorry.
That's okay. Just quickly, and I'm not sure, I just feel the need to point this out. So the first and last period yard, that's for all high school students. So it's not just a junior and senior.
That's correct. All students.
So while I fully support it in the sense of letting kids sleep in and manage their own time, I do feel I need to recognize that some kids won't have the option of coming later or leaving early. I don't know what we do about that, but it just strike me as not really equitable for.
No, but we have a later school start too. So I think that, we have taken some steps to address, things as a whole. And typically these students who are doing this are students who, drive to campus or whatever the case may be. And we just feel as though, especially for some of our kids, and for some of our parents, this can be really beneficial because they can schedule an appointment or something like that where they're not being pulled from class, which unfortunately now happens. So they're missing classes because of a dentist appointment. And we understand that, yet if we can give them more flexibility within their schedule, perhaps people can, work within that time frame.
Yeah, I definitely see the merits. I wish there was a way to help out the kids who didn't have the option of coming late or leaving early.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Any other further discussion? Okay, so this is a first read, so that means we're going to revisit it in our next meeting to vote for approving the changes to the 2020-2021 student handbooks. Thank you to all of the folks at both the high school and the middle school who have part in doing this. It's a much larger job reviewing the handbook every year and making changes than maybe it looks like when we present it to this committee tonight. So thank you to all of you who did all the work to decide what came forward for changes this year. Really appreciate it. We're moving on to the consent agenda. And this includes the approval of our minutes from March 2nd, as well as a list of athletic donations. Do we have any questions or comments about items on the consent agenda? Yep, Lynn?
So I think we talked about this the last time around with athletic donations for coaches. And I don't recall what the reasoning was for how we fund the various coaching staff, because I know, with basketball, we solicited money from parents, and then in this, and my screen won't populate. So is it lacrosse? Is the sport? I don't know, but what's happening in this one is a donation from a parent, I assume, but it just seems like our funding of coaches is kind of varied depending on the sport. Or am I reading that wrong?
Any money that's collected, Lynn, for coaching, a while back we set up so they would be gifts accepted by the school committee, and they would be paid through our payroll. So you'll see this for a lot of sports. So I'm hoping that basketball didn't collect money and then just gave it to an individual, because we are trying to streamline that so that we are covered, so they are covered under as though they were an employee during that time that they are assisting the team.
So then what's the donation
is probably, it's from that team where they probably collected just the same way. The parent, this is probably, the check is from the coaches, the captain's parents who have that fund that goes around. That's where that check is probably written from. So it's not a single donation. It's money from the team, from my understanding in most cases.
And I guess that's what we did in basketball. We collected. I didn't know how it appeared in front of the school committee, or I didn't realize it, but it just seems it's a flawed system.
Right. So John and Emily and I have been talking about how to rid ourselves of some of this unnecessary fundraising. And so I think we have plans to circle back and not, there's a couple other reasons I think that teams raise money. It's for, and John, I can't remember the name of the replay system.
The huddle.
The huddle, yes. I guess that's a new thing that
it's a video system that enables all of our sports to use clips for coaches and for players, but then it's also used as a recruiting tool for student athletes for colleges and universities.
So I guess from my understanding from Emily, a lot of teams, boosters pays half and then the teams have to fund the other half. We're going to find ways to to figure that out so it's not the unnecessary fundraising. So we do have some discussions in play, because this doesn't feel that great to us either, and we're trying to figure out a way to have teams, like if they want to do team building, how about a community service project and not selling cookie dough or doing, car washes or something. So it definitely is on our to-do list.
Right. I will say, on the other hand, I think that as a district, we also probably need to do some more comps looking at coaching staffs across the board, because I think for some of our sports, when we compare it to some of our other schools, we just need to make sure that the number of coaches we have is in line. We always have an adult for each program, so that's never an issue. But for some of our programs that have larger numbers, we just need to make sure that our coaching staffs are appropriate so that parents don't have to do that additional fundraising. And that may be something that down the road we propose and it comes through the actual budget.
I think it's come out of the fact of over time, we're a small system. So the easiest thing would just be to say, okay, we're going to have a freshman girls basketball team, a JV girls basketball team, and a varsity girls basketball team. We'll have the same in the boys. And what's happened over time is that because our population fluctuates, we might not need the freshman team. And if your population drops considerably, which it has in the past to classes of 100, you could possibly not need a freshman team for a decade. So the system has always tried to stay nimble. So if the numbers go up, then if people can raise the funds, the system has said, well, we're not going to automatically just put that money in because it's not budgeted. So if the numbers go up and people can fundraise and it's a team that's already been approved and in our ACED, then no problem. But if it's not one that's never been in the ACED, which is the case that happened this spring, then it has to go through this process. But I agree that it's not ideal, but it's a function of our being small and wanting to be nimble, because you don't want to carry a freshman team for 6 kids, because it's in the budget type thing. So that's where it comes from. And the other thing that has to be considered, and I experienced this as a parent when the kids were trying to put together a swim team, and the swim team was predominantly female. The argument that we as parents, and I was one of them, were making was that that's not fair, that you have X number of male teams and X number of dollars being spent on male teams and Y on female teams. So this was also a Title IX question. So it's really, the school committees have grappled with this for a long time at DS. So this is a really tricky one. But I think that's the thing that they settled on. The other thing that's important to remember is that DS doesn't collect gate fees. And so for the budget. And so that also complicates things. So on the harder side, on the positive side, our kids get to go to games for free, which I think is a positive thing. So I think you'd be wise, honestly, to maybe have a subcommittee take a look at this and see if you can tackle this, because I agree with you, Lynn. It just doesn't feel right. It doesn't pass the sniff test somehow.
Yeah, I mean, girls basketball has been raising money for its assistant coaches for JV and varsity for years.
Yeah, that it was supposed to be 3 years, as I understood it. And
that's for the team itself, not for the added coaches. That's right. That's a whole nother scenario.
No. If you have a team on the ACED for a JV girls basketball team, but you haven't had players, so you didn't run it, and then you wanted to run it again, the parents would raise the money for the coaches, right?
If it's in the ACED, we're obligated to fund it, and we have funded it.
Right.
But there's a difference between we were funding, because we talked about this when we did the ACED discussion, I don't know how many years ago now.
4.
But 4 years ago? Okay, thank you. It seems longer ago. But for instance, like for JV girls basketball, there might have been money for a coach. But then if the parents or the players decided they want an assistant coach, that wasn't in. So there wasn't for that. Or like for soccer, they want a goalie coach.
That's right.
And that's where the extra money has been coming from, which I think it's great that you're going to discuss that further, but I worry that it's also going to be that, so once you have, that's funded, then the parents could be like, well, we have a forehand coach for the tennis team. Now we need a backhand coach also, because they're always going to want.
Where does it end?
Where does it
Yeah.
end? Yeah.
Well,
And that's when you get into the gender equity issues, by the way. People are more willing traditionally to pay for certain sports over others. And that's where the Title IX stuff comes up typically.
Okay, this is a very thorny situation that it sounds like it needs some attention. One quick question I have, not on the topic of this consent agenda, but on the related topic is, John, I did see Emily sent out a survey, like trying to figure out like interest in fall sports.
Mhm.
And I guess my question is, I understand from just the conversation around tennis and so forth, there's a meeting in the fall to determine like whether or not we're like adding teams or whatever. But is there any way to survey, like, do winter and spring sports get kind of hosed a little bit on that because we didn't ask early, and then that meeting's once a year in the fall?
Well, those discussions are still held. I mean, what
Okay.
took place this year in tennis is
Yeah.
quite unusual. If we had seen this year after year, then obviously we would have taken action. But this is the first year where that has really been an issue. So
Okay.
it's hard in a given year. Certain kids are
Yeah.
coming up and coming through. So yeah, Emily does know that she's going to try to get that information on not only for the fall.
Yeah.
Our community has to do a little better job of responding to us, though, because
Yeah.
sometimes we don't get the returns on these surveys, and it has a financial implication, and we need that information. Doesn't mean that the kid is obligated to play, but even if we can have a good sense of it, it helps us, because that ACED comes up early in the fall. And then once those decisions are made, Emily is hamstrung. I mean, she can't. It's not that she doesn't want to add additional coaches. We'd love to, but that's just not the process.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. So it's like a twofold thing. The district will do its part, but parents have to respond to the surveys that they get because it really matters. Is that what I'm
Gives
hearing?
us really good, accurate information so that we can, meet as an ACED board to say, we spoke to the youth programs, we spoke to parents, we spoke to student athletes, and, here are our preliminary numbers. Can we do something about this?
Okay. Well, thank you. Do I have a motion on the consent agenda to accept the consent agenda as stated in your packet with the minutes of March 2nd and the list of athletic donations?
Judy Miller, so moved.
Great. Do I have a second?
Ann Hovey, second.
Thank you. Motion made by Judy Miller, seconded by Ann Hovey. Please take yourselves off mute. Lynn Collins,
Lynn Collins, yes.
Ann Hovey,
Ann Hovey, yes.
Shobha Fry,
Shova Fry, yes.
Kate Potter,
Kate Potter, yes.
Judy Miller,
Judy Miller, yes.
and Maggie Sharon, yes. Motion passes. Lastly, we have communications. They're minutes from our colleagues at the Dover-Sherborn School Committee and the Sherborn School Committee. Please read them and enjoy that bedtime reading, or if you have already read it. And then lastly, I am looking for someone who might make a motion to adjourn.
Lynn Collins, so moved.
Thank you. Motion by Lynn Collins,
Kate Potter, second.
second by Kate Potter. And can I just do a quick roll call vote? Judy? Judy's a yes. Shobha?
Yes.
Shobha's a yes. Kate?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
And Maggie, yes. And 8:13 p.m. the Regional School Committee meeting is adjourned. Enjoy your evening. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Everybody.